Hey, it's Eve from Class with Prof. Eve. Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to just share with you what I have done over the course of several years, over 10 years, building my writing career, building my authorship, getting publication agreements, publishing deals. So I want to share how I've done that and how I've gotten to the point where I am now, which is getting pretty consistent publishing deals. I have two different publishing contracts right now, and there's also other side writing projects that I do occasionally as well. Now, as with everything, success is not guaranteed and money is not guaranteed. You will have to put in the work, right? Things take time for most people. Most people don't just put, the writing out there and get the biggest book deal ever right away. So, especially when it comes to writing and becoming an author, you have to spend time refining your craft, doing your research, and really writing good, strong content and relevant content that people actually want to read. So nothing is possible without putting in that hard work, and you have to be patient in the time that it will take, to become successful. But if you stick with it and if you give it your absolute best, I think that, you will at least make some progress in your writing career. All right, so I'm actually going to share my screen occasionally throughout this presentation to just kind of pull up some of the slides that um, I'll go through, and that'll help me to stay a little bit organized as well. Okay, so the first thing here, let me see if I can hide the floating controls. All right, so the first thing that you can do is submit your work to local news sources. That means look at the available news sources in your community, in your city, in your state. These can be newspapers. I have written so many different letters to the editor, in my life and in adulthood, in response to articles that were presented in the news. Now, these aren't things that got me paid, but it was putting my writing out there. And exposure does pay, right? The more that your work is out there, the more likely that people will start paying attention to you, becoming familiar with you. And then when there is something that you're selling, they may buy that thing. So check out your local, news sources, newspapers. Maybe there's a column that you can introduce. Maybe there's something really interesting that you'd like to write about that's going on in your community. A newspaper might pick that up. You have a nature column or a column on the latest in tech. These are things that newspapers would probably be happy to pick up and have you on as an actual columnist, or maybe you become an editor for that newspaper. These things aren't as hard to do as you would imagine. I have gotten some requests to I often get these requests. Actually, I have one in my inbox right now that I need to respond to from a local newspaper to just give my feedback on a certain subject or write an excerpt for a certain, like Black History Month, for example, write, a column or something for Black History Month or make some sort of submission, for some local thing that's happening. So there's all sorts of ways that you can, connect with your local newspapers, but also think about, TV, the same idea. Maybe you could pitch a segment. Maybe you could write the segment write for the segments that are already existing. If you don't introduce your own, you could write for a segment that's already existing. And this is something that I would aspire to be paid for, of course, the work that it would take to do that. But, try it out. What's the worst that could happen? My dad used to always say to me, don't be afraid to ask any question because the worst response that you're going to get is no, and you'll survive no. You're going to be told no a lot in your life, right? Expect rejection. Rejections will happen. We'll come back to that before I conclude this video. Another thing on local news sources before I move on are online publications. You can start your own online publication. There is a great online publication in my town called Smile Politely. They are very well known. Almost everyone who reads in our town knows about Smile Politely. They just publish local news stories. They feature, local artists and people doing work and doing different projects. I'm sure I've had a few features on there myself. They'll cover things happening in the local theater community, etc. So you could start your own online publication catered to your local community. Again, going back to what I was saying about the newspaper column, this could be an online publication. You write all about arts in your town. You write all about the latest in AI, happening in your town. You create a column about that. You know what I'm saying? So the possibilities are really endless here. So do take advantage of this. And this is your local community. So these are people that know you, or will get to know you, that can actually meet you, right? And you being a member of the community, someone that actually lives in that place, I think adds a certain level of credibility as well, because you live there, right? You're familiar with the place. Maybe you've lived there for years. That adds credibility to what you're writing and what you're saying, the work that you're putting out there. And so don't underestimate the potential of connecting with your local community when it comes to sharing your work, because that is really the way that a lot of people build their base of subscribers, followers, paid customers, clients, is in their local communities. Because again, people can get to know you directly. Maybe they already know you and they know that you have a real understanding of what's going on because you live in that community. You have an investment. Okay, so let's move on to the next one here. I already did that, start an online publication. Share your work on social media. And this is something that probably a lot of writers do in the first place, but do it in an intentional way. Really think about what you're posting, right? If you're serious about developing a writing career, becoming an author, getting published, then you really do have to start thinking through what you're going to write, why you're writing it, who you want to read what you're writing, what impact you hope to have. Like these are things that you should be thinking through every single time you post something online if you're serious about your writing and you want people to take your writing seriously. Because it's really easy to just like post a flippant comment on Threads or something, or a post on Instagram, and that's all fine. Again, it's getting exposure, it's putting something out there for people to view. But intentionality tends to render stronger results and have a more long-term impact. And this is something that I'm learning and working through myself, because I do kind of like, the ability to just kind of like write whatever I want, just share my feelings. And I do that still, sometimes, and especially on my personal pages. But on, professional pages, if you've developed a professional page, especially, then you should be really intentional about what you are writing and what kind of impact you're hoping to have. So don't just share all over social media just to do it. Do it with thought. And so if you're posting something on Instagram, look at other Instagram posts of people who are doing similar things to you. How do they post? What kind of reactions are they getting? What kind of content tends to get the most, views or the most likes or whatever, if that's important to you? What kind of content tends to get comments? Because that shows much more of an investment than a like. And then you can modify your content, right, to do that same thing. And so each of these social media platforms have their own characteristics. They have their own style, their own ways that people engage. And you should study this actually and determine, okay, I have this post I'll give you an example. I wanted to share an activity that I did in my classes. We created vision boards in my classes. And it just ended up being much better than I thought. My students created these amazing vision boards. And so I was thinking, okay, I want to share this online, but I want to share this across like all of my social media, or at least a few of my social media, pages. And so I thought about, okay, what would this look like as a Facebook post? What would this look like as an Instagram post? What would this look like as a YouTube post? And I posted that content on vision boards across all three of those platforms, actually, right? And so the language changed a little bit on each of the posts. I switched up the vision board samples that I used on each of the posts as well. I really thought through, okay, for Instagram, much more visual platform, photos and videos. And so I wanted to display a lot of vision boards there. And in the post, I wanted it to be kind of this big collage of vision boards. And that's what I did for Instagram. For Facebook, you can post, I think, 3 images, and then it goes into like you have to click, and then you'll see the rest of them in a separate screen or something. So everything isn't displayed in one chunk like on Instagram. And so I was aware of that. And so I chose like the top 3 that I really like. Those are the ones that are going to be highlighted on Facebook. And then I added some more. And so if people were really interested, they could click and see the rest of the vision boards. And so I knew that that was, the difference between Instagram and Facebook as far as posting those different vision board images. On my YouTube post, I talked about that this was an activity that I did with my class. I got more into a discussion about what the activity was for my class because my YouTube channel is Class with Prof. Eve. So it was the most relevant for my YouTube channel. And so I wanted to kind of talk about, these are the kinds of activities I come up with. I try to think outside the box, with my students and that sort of thing. And then I added, some of the vision boards there as well. I didn't post as many on the YouTube post. That was more about just giving them a little glimpse of some of the stuff I do with my students and more of just kind of telling them about my teaching style because it was really relevant to my YouTube channel. So that's an example of how you can use one piece of content and modify it across different social media platforms. Okay? So the World Wide Web is amazing. Millions upon millions of people online every single day. So you absolutely want to use this. This is a free resource for the most part. And so definitely take advantage of sharing your work on social media. All right, so I think this is the last one. Submit your work to publications and publishers. I remember when I was on Twitter, I'm not on Twitter anymore now, I'm on Threads. So you can follow me there. I post every day on Threads. When I was on Twitter, though, it was really common to see people like in my author community space sending queries to editors, to book publishers. They would just like send them the query directly. And sometimes the publishers or the editors would make a call for queries. And a query is your kind of your pitch for your book or your article, I guess it could be. Most times it was books that you're writing to just kind of get the attention of the publisher and see if they're interested. So there's a whole process there, but sometimes they would ask, for queries, like we're open to queries, you can send them to me. And that's again the beauty of the internet is that you have such close contact with people that you never would have in the past. These major companies and corporations are online. You can talk directly to stakeholders online. They may see your work online themselves without you doing anything. You post it and they just may come across it somewhere. And that is something very unique and special about our modern day. So send your work directly to publishers, inquiry letters, or complete a full book proposal. And just do it. Again, don't worry about, oh, it's not good enough yet. What if they say no? Because that is going to be the process of learning for you. Get their feedback. They know, right? They know good writing. They know what they're looking for. They know what attracts audiences. So your rejection is going to give you some feedback because usually they will give you some feedback if they don't accept your work. They'll tell you why. Okay? Submit to online publications or to publications in general. I have done this so many different times, and what do I mean by that? I mean HuffPost, truthout.org, nextavenue.org. These are all places I've published. by just writing something that I thought would be interesting for their website. Of course, I did a review of the content that was already on their website and looked at common articles, common topics, and themes. And then I thought, oh, okay, I have an interest here too. And there's actually an idea that I have for an article or an essay that could go up on their website. And I send them what I wrote. I don't always get a yes. I've been told no before, no thank you. I've also been asked to make modifications to my writing in order for it to be accepted. I've been asked things that I declined to do, and that's also the freedom that you have. But again, it's feedback, it's intel for you. And again, I wasn't always paid to publish on these online publications. Sometimes it was just the exposure that I was getting. I published with Truth Out. Let me share that article on all of my social media. And then maybe someone else will share it on their social media and someone else will share it from there. And then your work is spread all over the internet. So do not underestimate the potential of exposure, just exposure. Now, if you are being asked to write, lengthy articles or do some research, do some interviews or something that's going to require a lot of time, then again, you should ask for pay. You should be paid for your work. And Next Avenue, I'll say in particular, because that's been the longest relationship I've had with an online publication. When I first published with them, they'd seen a article that I'd written for HuffPost. And so they reached out to me based on an article that they saw that I wrote on HuffPost and wanted me to write a similar article for their website. The article that I wrote on HuffPost I did that for free. I did that as a part of a project that I was working with. But Next Avenue, someone from Next Avenue saw that post on HuffPost, contacted me and said, hey, this is what we do on this website. Would you be interested in writing a column for our website? And I said, yeah. And I wrote my first article for their website. They paid me $250 for my first article. When I came back to them with another idea that I had for another piece, they paid me $500 for that essay. And now every single time that I work with them, I'm paid $500+ for every single essay. So that is a great example of exposure, right? And also kind of working your way up to pay and increasing your pay along the way by building relationships with these individuals. And once your work is out there, who knows what could happen? Who knows who's going to see it? I never planned on getting a textbook deal. I never planned to write textbooks. That was not in the cards for me. Although I'd reviewed all kinds of textbooks, used all kinds of textbooks, hundreds throughout the course of my teaching career, I never planned on writing a textbook. But I was getting all these emails from textbook publishers saying, are you interested in writing something for us? Would you be interested in this? And then, when I got one from Cognella Academic Publishing, I don't know what it was that was most attractive about them because I received several before that. But whatever it was in their letter got my attention, and I wrote back and I'm like, okay, what's this about? I've never published anything but some, articles online. I've been a professor for several years. I've reviewed a lot of textbooks. I think I can do this. And they gave me a chance. We started with a reader. And so that took a little bit of the pressure off for me because I was able to select essays written by other people to put into this reader or this anthology. And so the only thing that I had to originally write were the introductory summaries. And that was like a half page at most. Sometimes they were shorter than that. Sometimes they were like 8-sentence paragraphs or something like that. And so that was a way of me kind of getting my foot into the textbook publishing door, but with that reader. And so I wrote the intro summaries for each of the essays. I wrote, the introduction to the book and, put together references. And that's all that I did. Most of the writing in that book was from other people. But it was a good exercise for me to just get accustomed to putting a book together, writing in textbook style, and all that sort of thing. And so when, they came to me with the idea of writing my own book, I was ready to do that. And so then with that same publisher, I wrote a full introduction to sociology textbook, a book of my writing that I completely formatted, designed, and wrote myself. And what's also interesting about that, my second book with Cognella, is that there was actually a competition for my book among like three different publishers, and it was about royalties because I had agreed to a pretty low royalty rate for that anthology. It was my first textbook, and I, just wasn't sure about things, wasn't super confident, and so I agreed to pretty low royalties for that book. But once we got to the full textbook, I was like, I'm going to need higher royalties for this one. And so I'd also been propositioned by like one or two other publishers, and they had given me a royalties rate. And so I went back to Cognella and I said, this other publisher offered me this amount of royalties for this book. Can you all match this or go higher? And they went higher, and I stayed with the publisher that I was with. So I'd gotten into this position where there were several publishers wanting to work with me, and I had positioned myself with the ability to be able to negotiate my royalties and get much higher royalties for my second book than I did for the first one. And if I ever write another book with them, which I'm in conversations to write another book with them, guess what? The royalty rate's going to be higher. So once you form these relationships, you're getting the attraction of other publishers as well. And you can start making your own demands for how much you want to get paid, for what your royalties need to be. Start negotiating aspects of your contract. Okay. And so I've done this successfully for over 10 years. I now can call myself an author. I am an author, a published author. I have two current book deals, contracts, or whatever you want to call them, in operation right now, academic publishing and general publishing. I'd mentioned in one of my short videos, that I am working on, I'm editing my books with Cognella, my textbooks, and we're also talking about a separate project. And then I'm also working on a project with Simon and Schuster. I'm working with their self-publishing wing, Archway Publishing, because I wanted to publish this book as a self-published book. Who knows what the next one is probably going to be a little bit different, but I'd like to still work with Simon and Schuster. So I have just, projects going on all the time. I'm working on an article for Next Avenue that I want to submit pretty soon. And the opportunities are always coming in. Like there's always things going on. Like I mentioned, I have an email right now that I need to respond to from our local newspaper. They reach out to me all the time to give feedback on certain things, to add a quote, to write a paragraph about something, to give a response. All the time they reach out to me. And I'm not doing any, I haven't done anything, much in the community, in recent years. I used to do a lot more kind of community work that would get a lot of news attention and things like that. But I've been focused more on my teaching and other aspects of my career. But they still reach out to me, these newspapers and news sources. So once you put yourself out there, you develop your craft, I think that you have the potential for great success. And I wish you the best. I love writing. I love the process. I love learning new things and refining my technique, and being paid as a bonus to be able to move into this as an aspect of my career and my work is really a privilege for me. So I hope that this was useful to you all and encouraging to you all. Leave a comment if you have any other questions or other topics around this that you'd like for me to discuss, because as I'm going through this video, I'm like, there's a lot of things I would like to talk about or I could talk about in this realm, because I've done a lot in this realm and I'm still actively in this process. So do let me know. If you like the video, then show that you did by liking it. You could share it and certainly subscribe to the channel if you feel like that's something that you want to do. and I will see you all in my next video. Peace.